What errand?
For the cause, Ada. The good old cause.
Welcome to Top Shelf Fandom. I'm your host, Justin Thomas. Before anything, subscribe, hit that like button, and make sure to consider supporting creativity. If $3 a month would be no skin off of your back, and you'd like to make an impact somewhere and it doesn't make an impact on your bank account, like I said, make sure to consider donating. The bare minimum of $3 a month can make a huge impact over here and help us make higher quality as well as quantity of videos here. So more videos at higher quality. If you'd like to support it, check out the link and information below and be part of the process. All right, guys, let's jump into it. So we're going to start off. This is going to be a Peaky Blinders centric video, the topic of the anti-hero and why we really like the anti-hero, but touch on this comment that was made that has a lot of the misconceptions as well as truth embodied in it. And in no way is this meant to slam that commenter. As I said, there was plenty of truth in there and the misconceptions are widespread. And we will block out the name just to be careful. The issue I have with the show is that Thomas Shelby isn't a likable protagonist. Now, you may say that is the point, but you have to find your main character charismatic. Look at Breaking Bad. Walter is a bad guy, but you root for him because you are manipulated into liking him. However, in this show, I never warmed to Thomas Shelby. When he accomplishes things or survives Magnanimous rampage, you don't feel relief or satisfaction for his success. The main problem with the show, in my opinion, that is verbatim. So this embodies a lot of the misconception of why people like series that feature anti-heroes at the helm. I do want to mention this is everybody's right to not like anything you want. You can have any reason you want, but you can't pose as absolutes if they are incorrect. So you have a few misconceptions here, and overall though, this really brings up a lot of the great aspects that I like to talk about in storytelling, and the misconceptions lead us to these answers here. So we will touch on the likability of a protagonist and how that comes about, if it's necessary or not. And we will be comparing Walter White with Thomas Shelby to see how this really plays out.
See a study of change. Well, that's all of life, right? I mean, it's the constant, it's the cycle, it's solution, dissolution, just over and over and over. It is growth, then decay, then transformation.
We will cover the most important but the most base level aspect of storytelling of any kind, but especially in this case when you have the misconception of likability, that you have to like or approve or get behind, or it's just a faulted character doing bad things for a good reason. The building blocks of story in general, and the only real solid rule is the one that we're going to talk about right now, the one emotional connection that must be made, and that is empathy. So if you guessed that, give yourself a pat on the back. Empathy is the adhesive that glues the viewer to a story. Empathy is needed for a story to work at its base level, as well as possibly the one element I am willing to go against my philosophically sound place. I definitely try to stick to when forming any thesis to assure it's based on rock-solid logic between a pragmatist and a purist approach. And I usually will never claim, rightfully so, that the road I'm paving, meaning the method, is the only method, but it 100% will get you there. But everyone does have to draw a line at some point, and I will go as far to pose empathy as the only element a story actually will not function without evoking an emotional connection with your reader or the viewer. It's an empathetic one first and foremost. There's a misconception that you need to have sympathy or you need to think they're charismatic and like them, support what they're doing. It's amazing how much we don't realize. We're not rooting for somebody to win. You understand why these characters are doing what they're doing. You don't agree with what they're doing necessarily.
You know, I don't exactly know how to feel about all this.
For real, yo. The whole thing felt kind of shady, like morality-wise.
Totally.
How do you feel now?
Better.
Yeah, definitely improving.
And it's not always likability. As far as protagonists go, Prestige TV has made the anti-hero the mainstay. There's many reasons for this. Some people will tell you that we love characters with faults. That is true. Also, an anti-hero supports multiple seasons of story. It is perfect for long-form storytelling. That is what the golden age of television and Prestige TV offers you. 7 to 8 seasons of a good television in most cases, if they are lucky. But you don't have to stretch for fresh story or try to recycle past story thread or character arc. An anti-hero is unpredictable. An anti-hero is complex. They are layered like an onion. Every time you peel it, you get another layer that is more putrid than the last.
We can amend the complaint further.
You're like an onion, Mr. Thompson. The more layers we peel.
I prefer to think of myself as an artichoke.
Are they a plot convenience? Absolutely. But are they just a lazy writer's tool, and that's why we've seen so many of them? No, they're intriguing. They pull us in, provide us with a broader spectrum as far as walking in others' shoes. When we consume story, we are consuming another world. We're engaging, immersing ourselves in another world. And that world is revolved around the protagonist. Since how much we see is up to the protagonist, we hope for a layered protagonist that goes down multiple roads and maybe not too sure about their path. Speaking of paths, let's start off with one of the most important elements, how we're introduced. Essentially, what's their deal? The characters' plight in life. Where are they when the story starts?
It just seems like something's missing, doesn't it? There's got to be more to a human being than that.
What's their deal? The characters' plight in life. Where are they when the story starts in the current world in which they inhabit? Let's take a look at how we're introduced to Thomas Shelby opposed to how we're introduced to Walter White.
They're doing a magic spell to make her win a race.
The horse's name's Monaghan Boy. Kempton, 3 o'clock, Monday. You ladies have a bet yourselves, but don't tell anyone else.
Thomas Shelby is shown in command, totally in control, riding in on a horse, much like a classical western in which the hero rides into the town and ends up saving the day, opposed to Walter White in a flash forward cold opening in which we see Walter looking very out of control, manic, pitiful in his whitey tighties, in a desperate state, leaving us to wonder, how did this poor sap get into this situation? The only information we receive is some exposition via Walter talking into a video cam, apologizing and letting his family know everything that he has done has been for them.
To all law enforcement entities, this is not an admission of guilt. I am speaking to my family now. Skylar, you are the love of my life. I hope you know that.
He continues to pull out a handgun and then points it towards the vacant desert road in which you can hear the sounds of the sirens. This is an action taken by a man at the end of his rope, immediately instilling in the audience a sympathetic point of view in opposition to Thomas Shelby. Thomas Shelby is seen as a mysterious man, a power, possibly a hustler, that seems to have a clear handle on the situation. A coldness is present, instilling a sense of skepticism and doubt, leaving the audience with more of a what's this guy up to attitude, opposed to Walter White's how did this pitiful man get himself into this jam. How a character is introduced to you is just as important as making a first impression in real life, if not more important when perceiving a character in a fictional story. The flow of information is highly controlled by a good storyteller. The audience is a blank slate. Their minds are an empty stage. You will place characters one by one on an empty stage and make them do things. What you tell the audience is what they'll know. What you do not tell them is what they will not know. Therefore, you must tell them what you want them to know when you want them to know it. This scene drives home that things are out of Walter's control, but as we will find out, Walter is much more in control and prides himself on being in control as the series goes on, and compared to Thomas Shelby, which on a surface level, Thomas Shelby initially does come off as less likable than Walter, and this does play out through a lot of the series. A good author controls the flow of information at every level. You reveal things about the environment that no character knows. You reveal things about one character, motives and agendas, that the other characters do not know. You reveal something that all the characters know but one, playing clued in characters against clueless characters. It's a simple formula of all drama. As as the audience, we are the most clueless characters. The audience comes into the story knowing nothing. You must reveal information strategically to maximize suspense, maintain tension, hold an audience interest, prioritize characters that you want connections with. Breaking Bad's teasers play before the opening title. This is usually something that's only present in a pilot. Now, Vince Gilligan uses these brilliantly, but take note of the narrative structure here. Narrative structure is not only just the framework in which the story is told, but it highly affects the character's development, or how you see their development. Meaning, Walter White's crimes are somewhat exposed here in his vicarious situation, but it's taking the juxtaposition between Walter before he breaks bad and Walter after he breaks bad. Instead of having the transition play out throughout the series, Gilligan isolates it into a chamber and essentially creates this hyper awareness of the juxtaposition that you get regardless. It is very present. We get much more of Walter White before he breaks bad than we ever get of pre-World War I Tommy.
I always use the First World War as the sort of, as the sort of line. And there was a Tommy before the First World War. And then that happened, and then there's a Tommy Shelby after the First World War, and he's the one that we meet at the beginning of Series 1.
He looked at me the wrong way.
Just taking a look at the first episode of Peaky Blinders, not even looking into Tommy's brothers, two of which also were in the war with him, we have characters who deal with the experience of the war. Danny Wisbane is a great example of showing us what Tommy could be, how much of a mess Tommy could be.
You're not a whiz-bang.
Freddie Thorne is more of an example and a mirroring of what Tommy could be if he maintained some of his supposed idealistic views and ideology that he had prior to the war.
Maybe you should put a bullet in Danny Whiz-Bang's head like they do with mad horses. Maybe you'll have to put a bullet in my head someday too.
Which is spoken about in the series' later seasons. It's implied that there was a drastic personality shift for Tommy before and after his experiences in the First World War.
The men that came back from that conflict were just devastated. And so there was this huge societal change where you had all these men who had witnessed war on a scale that we'd never sort of imagined.
It's all right. It's all right.
And of course, back then they were just spat back into society with no help. For Tommy, I think what it did was he lost all faith. Religion was just a joke. Authority was just a joke. The establishment was a joke. Tommy was a clay kicker in the First World War, which is basically a tunneler. They tunneled under enemy lines and set explosives. And so it was the most claustrophobic, horrific, dark job you could possibly have. Like the worst of the worst, And he seems to turn that trauma into this kind of relentless. He could have died at any point there. He's not afraid of death, so every day is just like for free, so why not?
During which he was a tunneler, he volunteered to dig tunnels covertly in order to place enormous amounts of explosives beneath enemy lines, a tactic used several times in the war to a devastating effect. Thomas was part of the Small Heath Rifles at the rank of Sergeant Major, a non-commissioned officer. He's in charge of the well-being and morale and training of the entire unit, and all other sergeants and corporals would have answered to Tommy. It earned him a certain amount of respect on both the streets and within the military.
My name is Thomas Shelby, and today I'm gonna kill a man. Today's Derby Day.
He's in charge of the morale of the men, so we see him really utilizing these militaristic ways, especially with Arthur. Anytime he needs to really drive something home to somebody, he will speak as their superior officer. It's very interesting. Tommy's past and this innocence within Tommy is only spoken about. So opposed to Walter, who we see break bad, we only know that Tommy used to be different. In a visual medium that does nothing, innocence is really left on the shelf.
Having a little trouble walking?
Gretchen and Elliot didn't give you a dime. They paid for nothing. You refused every offer they made you. But that didn't make sense.
If you look at all the actions, all the egregious stuff that is carried out, and you think who had agency over those actions, meaning whose back was most against the wall and who chose to go down the dark path, it should come to no surprise to you that Walter White is the one that chooses to break bad. His back is the one that is least against the wall. Tommy, at the start of the conflict, Tommy's back is usually fairly cornered. Of course, he is not innocent in this, but it is a fact that Walter White chooses to break bad much more than Thomas Shelby, more than the other. It is Walter White that chooses to break bad. This shouldn't be a surprise, but far more than Thomas Shelby. Walter has no argument for not choosing his lifestyle himself. He owns it, as a matter of fact. But the base conflict resolution at a surface level, $737,000. That goal has a resolution that is Deus Ex Machina right onto Walter's lap, with the assistance offered to him to pay for his medical bills. He turns that down, of course, and that causes more problems, and we can understand that, but we still have to take into account that he never had to sell meth and chose to, and he was introduced into that world beforehand. He did dip his toes in, note the teaser. So we have to understand that Tommy is coming from a place of in no way being a Boy Scout, but Tommy on a base level usually is with his back against a wall far more than Walter White. Tommy has the guns dropped onto his lap that weren't supposed to be taken. He didn't order those, but he does what good businessmen are supposed to do. Where others see problems, they see opportunity. Tommy does this. Tommy is kind of following the storyline essentially that goes along with that old adage that the best crooks own the prisons and the worst crooks fill the prison. It seems like Tommy's quite on his way to owning a prison.
Way of the world. Fortune drops something valuable into your lap, you don't just dump it on the back of the cuts.
With his seat in Parliament. So his goal is to be legitimate. He does want to get into legitimate business and make them a fully non-criminal family. But in the same sense, I really don't see a huge quarrel with those criminal ways. With Tommy, I definitely see that he doesn't like to see others get hurt, but he makes a lot of decisions for people, and he has agency over people. Break it down, Tommy makes a lot less atrocious decisions and chooses to try to abstain more than he chooses to break bad. Walter's want is money. His need is to break bad.
I am not in danger, Skylar. I am the danger. A guy opens his door and gets shot. You think that of me? No. I am the one who knocks.
Want is money. His need is to break bad. In opposition, and they are always not pronounced to you. So you have two characters. Their wants and needs, of course, are at odds. Tommy's want is to be legitimate. I think his need is just peace. Tommy doesn't ever showcase joy. Walter gets joy from Breaking Bad, so that's another aspect that goes against him. But again, it's beautifully framed by Vince Gilligan, and it's just the way in which it's portrayed. You don't see another incarnation of Tommy. So Tommy just seems static in his badness, right? So I could see why some might not be rooting for them, but it's always important to take note of the little nuances and how, Inspector Campbell is, yes, a douchebag outside of work, but he's also a douchebag at work. Hank is essentially your hero of another story. He is a hero of another story. Walter is he's Darth Vader. He is a tragic backstory villain, and with just a slight flux in this narrative structure. That's what makes it so intelligent. They put it right in front of you, and they put all these characters that make you hyper aware of the pressure on him when they aren't really trying to do anything other than help him. His son's charity website brings trouble to him until he figures out how to launder money to it. So if you can turn Skylar, pre-cheating Skylar, and Walter Jr. are Finn and Hank Vegas enemies, you've got one hell of a writer on your hands. So Breaking Bad might be one of the best written series ever. Without a doubt, it's in the top 5. So I think that it's beautifully written. I think Peaky Blinders is a beautifully constructed show. I think there might be just, again, it's amazing when you ask somebody what they like about a story or what they find appealing about it. It's sometimes, even for myself, it's hard to answer. You got to look at all these aspects that play into it, all of the cinematography, the score, a world in which it's presented to you, like we talked about earlier. So it's important to take note of that, surrounded by others that are just there to service the plot and service the protagonist to be able to move along with the plot, like living in a vacuum. But at the end of the day, Walter is accepting of what he is, and there's something to be said for that. That resonates with people a lot. And I think that Thomas Shelby always accepts who he is and knows that he isn't a good man.
His anger is unfucking justified. I want him to acknowledge that he who fights by the sword, he fucking dies by it, Tommy.
as soon as people stop lying to themselves, usually a audience will come around. So actions need to make sense, and even turning down hundreds of thousands of dollars to sell meth and deal with everything that Walter White did, those decisions still, I didn't agree with him, but I had empathy for him, and his back was technically never against that wall.
One more time that you did this for the family.
I did it for me.
Wanted agency, wanted to feel like he had a say in his own life, and I guess you can't deny somebody that. You can probably put him in jail. So that'll be it for this one. We will have to do the Mosley, who is a worst person possible. It's not usually just having somebody worse than your protagonist, but it doesn't hurt, and Mosley is definitely that. They have flagged me a few times on this video. If you can't tell, this last section is a little bit rushed or a little bit different because I've had to redo this last 15 minutes and adjust this video about 6 times. So the copyright is very strict, but make sure to check out the stream that should be on the day after this is released with John Delavante, a professional composer, and we will be doing a lot of fun stuff on the channel. So subscribe, hit that like button.
You're goddamn right.
And make sure to check out the Patreon if you guys want to support creativity. It means the world.
You're not angry?
What do you mean? Angry? Live and not live.
That's very understanding.
Whatever, man. I just want to go home.
Yeah. Me too.
Sometimes it's your best shot, but it's not nearly good enough. Sometimes you believe that you are good at all this stuff. Sometimes you go thinking about what you've got in store.
The moment I do,
But sometimes doesn't matter.
are you gonna stick me with that broken piece of plate?
Sometimes things are easy when most others find them hard. Sometimes you forget about what sets us all apart. Sometimes you get lonely as you watch that bedroom door. But sometimes doesn't matter anymore. Sometimes you're a loser, and you really think it's true. But sometimes you just lose her, and there's nothing you can do. Sometimes there's a problem you might think that you can fix. Sometimes you get cocky with your bag of clever tricks. And sometimes it's a wonder that this ever worked before. But sometimes doesn't matter anymore. Sometimes you get hopeful and you let yourself be fooled. Sometimes you forget about all the things you learned in school. Sometimes you're so eager you can't see she's out the door. But sometimes doesn't matter she's left you on the floor. Now sometimes doesn't matter.